Okay, so let me try that again, and you maybe you have anything else to add, we can riff on it. Um, so I think that the goal at the organization level with the HIC data, collapsed from project to organization, is to show these two outcomes. One of which is dissolution or death or exit, I think is probably the best word for that. Um, and how whatever variable we're choosing on the right hand side to emphasize that, we show that the more that the organization feels the pressure of the state, the federal directed mission, the more likely they are to dissolve, especially when they're, let's say, transitional housing, right? Or if they're not in the mission. Um, so maybe even just transitional housing as like an indicator and interact that with federal funding, or perhaps it's the share that are in HMIS. And then you have these compositional things that you mentioned, the variables about the percentage from different government levels, faith-based versus non. Those are really intriguing, also like aspects of maybe we're unpacking the pressures that predict dissolution. But then on the other side, the second pair of DVs that maybe the same set of predictors try to explain is something about their scale and growth. And so maybe then that variable is the number of beds or some kind of like share adjusted of each bed type. So for an organization at the organization level, what percentage of PSH beds do you have, plus the percentage of ES beds in the COC, plus the percentage, right? And then whatever we choose to account for differences in the cost of different models, we show essentially that orgs grow when they do the dance. And by do the dance, I mean pursue PSH and RRH and move away from transitional housing. And somehow the McKinney-Vento indicator variable is part of that prediction. The specific models that they use is part of the prediction. And then maybe as I mentioned, sort of these moderators of like HMIS percentage, or maybe government percentage, or percent of the organizations that get McKinney-Vento funding in the COC, right? That would be another like intuitive way to show this. So that's more of a standard, like almost like a fixed effect regression, right? Or a hybrid model where you have random and fixed effects. Those are maybe a nice way to get at some of this, to account for the fact that a lot of them might not have within McKinney-Vento variation because they're getting funding the whole time. They just change what they're using it for. But basically those two results, either side by side or in a tables back to back, are telling a consistent story, hopefully. And the story is, from an organization perspective, engaging with these grand challenges, their success is based upon their conformity to this specific mission that has been directed through the federal government and its strategic plans related to housing first. And the more that they feel those pressures, the more they get rewarded for doing the right things, and the more they get penalized and potentially even have to leave the industry when they're not playing ball. They're not conforming, let's say. And so it's almost like then you show both things. It's you either do the dance or you exit. And those things are predicted by the indicators of mission influence. And then stepping back to the COC level, we cite all the research, we show the basic graphs, and say maybe these things can help us make sense of the COC lack of results. And instead of trying to prove with another round of COC level panels that these things don't succeed, we appeal to the literature. Kevin Corrin's PSH paper, my paper in SEJ, your guys' thousands of amazing papers on these things, and we start to basically say understanding the role of organizations in a mission requires an appreciation of the feedback mechanisms that reward or hinder their organizational outcomes. And perhaps it is because those organizational outcomes are based on their choice of strategy instead of their ability to deliver on the goals, that we see the disconnect. And that's our sense making theoretically of the organization patterns that we showed. And that's the end of the paper, and we get published and change the world. What do you think?
I like it. That's basically our paper is done with that outline.
Can we do it, Andrew?
Oh yeah, this sounds good. Seems like a good plan. I've been taking notes too. That's why I'm not just like writing.
No, I know.
Yeah. No, this sounds good. Sounds like a clear plan, and I think it's going to come together pretty easily.
And if they want us to show more COC like proof, then I think that would be something we would have a chance to cross later.
Mm.
I feel like this is the new thing, and even though it's what we all anticipate to be going on, it is it's sort of pulling back the curtain on the organizations as the vehicle through which mission is administrated and how their outcomes ride on their adherence to the mission in ways that do not yield the mission's goals. And maybe even, you mentioned rightly, Andrew, that a ton of this PSH is going to families and to non-chronically homeless people. I don't know how much we want to get in the weeds of that, but the targeting is missed in this as well, right? I mean, if we're diagnosing what's going on, part of the problem is because they're not tracking that closely, who's getting what units or where they're coming from or all those things, at least until recently. People are housing whoever's the easiest to house with permanent subsidized housing when they're brief and non-recurring individuals, right? Which is the main 80% of people who experience homelessness are families in one, non-recurring brief stints. And they're getting rapid or permanent housing solutions. So that, I mean, maybe that's getting too in the weeds, but I think part of it is like the allocation to need that's gotten missed. And somehow our story needs to, at least talk about that. But yeah, so I guess I have to run pretty soon. I'm sure you guys do as well. This has been awesome. I'm really excited. I guess since I'm sort of like on this sprint, to do as much as I can on this prior to whenever baby comes, and then I'll probably have a couple days where I'll be MIA, and then my plan is to get back to it. We've got some family coming to help. This is basically, I see this as like my top priority. I think I've got one other paper that is probably going to get submitted to this special issue just out of disclosure, but it's unrelated. It's not a homelessness, and it's with somebody else, and it's it's a different thing. And this is the one that she's really excited about, and I think rightly so. So what do you need from me with respect to like these? I mean, I think sort of some of this analysis would be a good place to go. I'm happy to try to like write up some of what I just described, especially if you send me that transcript. I could certainly like write a roadmap of what I in the meantime. But I think getting those empirics like going would be awesome too.
Yeah, I think I can make just like a death data set real quick or exit data set real quick. So that if you want to play around with any descriptives, and then I can start the more formal analysis. But probably we'll probably need you for the writing piece, at least for the motivation, just from things like death versus exit. Like, don't
Totally.
your field.
Yeah, if you could set the tone of this, whatever, like this long speech into the writing, that would be really great to really try to test and fill up this ideas and datas and whatnot. But if you can like rough this out like with the document, that would be great. I think that would be much make our process really quick.
Yeah.
Are there any like specific context things you think we need? Like this is literally how the law works, so like the funding, more like timeline kind of stuff. Like we know that like the federal government has prioritized housing first since X year, but like that stuff probably needs to go in the paper too, right?
Yes, I think that'll be pretty easy to do. But yeah, I think what I would envision, I have to see how it comes out as I like maybe try to like write it sort of like an introduction, like roadmap, and then maybe outline some of what I would propose for the rest. But I think that basically there's like probably like a context section that an intro and then like a context section where we try to give like as brief as cliff notes but still nuanced of what's happened, um, and then kind of go into some of like the theoretical considerations that were almost like question driven rather than hypothesis driven is sort of what I'm envisioning, where we raise like sort of this idea of what we were saying before, how do organizations succeed or fail in this industry, and what's the role of the mission and the pressure from the federal government in their outcomes. And then we can kind of hint and allude to the fact that like given these aggregate trends, it seems like they are in this situation of do or die based on the choices that they make to provide certain kinds of shelter. And basically then we do the empirics and we show that that's the case. And then we kind of pull back to that aggregate level again and say like, okay, given that, maybe this helps us understand why the aggregate's not working. So I think there will be some like crash course in COCs and but we're all used to that. We've all done that in, every paper we've written on this. I also had, I don't know if you guys have ever seen this one because it's in like a random journal. It's called the Review of Austrian Economics, but I have like basically almost like another case study type paper. Let me send it here. Is this it? Where I was like basically the first paper I ever wrote in like my first or second year of grad school.
I have read this one. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I didn't know anything, but most of it I think is still right, and it kind of I think we don't need to go this hardcore with some of the critiques, but I think sort of like the logic of like resource allocation that's talked about in that paper is part of the almost like this, if you will, sense making theoretically that we're trying to do in the back. Like that's what I'll probably be trying to write, almost like a version of some of this with our nuanced understanding and thinking about how the organizations are affected. There's stuff about crowding out in there and like the incentive misalignment basically and how resources are allocated on a certain basis. And basically our story is then that we're showing that organizations experience that in ways that the industry is shaped through these incentives, and it doesn't line up with the performance in the aggregate. So I don't know if that answers your question about how much COC details. I think that'll probably be something on the front end, as light as we can to not like scare somebody off who's just like used to working with the S&P 500 their whole life, you know?
I think that we try to minimize the context would be ideal, like kind of brief as possible and more like like industry and strategy view and or this is a grant challenge they're talking about. So this is one of the topic, but like not much really detail context, I think.
Syrian's a really good perfectionist too, so that's why before I was gonna see if she wanted to, but that sounds good.
Do we want to meet next time or do we want to just do touch base?
It's been great for me to have this sort of on my schedule. And I think certainly if we're going to go for it in 8 weeks or 10 weeks or however long we have, we should probably keep meeting, especially before my third child comes.
You will be the third co-author I have who's had a child this year, so
Hey.
and they've all been great papers. So like,
All right. Awesome.
So next week I have a workshop thing I have to do all week for an assistant professor. And then so the 13th or 14th are much more open for me. And then also I think that can get us rolling a bit sooner and give you enough time, hopefully, before in case the kid comes a bit early.
I'm fine for the 13th or 14th. And I mean, if there's a world where if you did want to, I'm happy to like look as well at some of the data and have as, I mean, that's kind of whatever you feel with that. But I mean, you know, I've done some of it too. I think I've got a panel that's like through 2017, but I think we want to use longer and so it's, I mean, if you want, we can kind of bounce ideas back and some Stata files, you know, in the interim.
Do you
And
have
maybe
organization ID for what is it, 2016?
I think I manually created some kind of identifier to try and link. Have you done something like that as well?
So that's what the one TA had been working on, and then we had him switch to something else. So I think we're through like New York or something. So we're not all the way through. And he was going back to, I guess, 2012. Because that would give us another 4 years, especially with the outcomes we're looking at here.
Yeah, I think we need to do that probably because that's the period, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah, and I was thinking that too. Yeah.
that's when it's happening. Um, so let me, I mean, a simple way is kind of to take the text, right, and just like of the name of the organization.
Yeah, that's what we had done before with one, and yeah.
It's not perfect. And when you're talking about exits, that's, you know, I mean, one thing that could make that easier is if you take the organization name and you assume that within year it's going to be consistent, like within year and let's say state or whatever, right? Then every exit you can, you know, search for. That's going to dramatically reduce the number, right? Because you only need to confirm the ones that seem like they've fallen off. And like why have they changed? So maybe so what do you have at the org or project level? What years have you been using? Just
Org
2016?
ID starts in 2016. I need to see what.
Right. When you said you set up the HMI or the HIC raw data, what years like what was that?
Oh, technically 2012 through 23, but we don't have the ID for everything because it wasn't necessarily needed for all the projects. Let's see, my TA is on. Oh yeah, New York. Okay. So not quite done, and I'm not sure we'll get done in time. So the thing is, so it's like more like if you download all the files, clean it up a bit because they change variable names and stuff, and put it together in a panel.
Yeah.
That's what I have cleaned up. The thing
Okay.
is, for the other project, we were really focused on like geocoding them,
Right.
which is something different and not very helpful for this.
Okay, that sounds that I think so. I can, if you are open to sending me sort of like what that looks like, I can also look at what I've got ID wise for those years in the sort of panel that I had, and we can try to triangulate. I mean, frankly, I think that it would probably be sufficient to just if we split it up and took a couple days and tried to like do our best with that. It might not be perfect, but I think we'll be able to like basically first pass, automate same name, applying an ID, and then any ones that are dropping off, we're sort of like sorting within, state and by name over year to then try to like see if an acronym's used or whatever, which happens sometimes. But that I think I think that would be pretty doable to kind of make it ready.
Okay, that sounds good. I'm gonna like fix up the rest of that, whatever he's done already, because into that should narrow it down to like a quarter of states. So, okay,
Okay,
that sounds good.
that's fantastic. And so my goal, and besides triangulating with you on that, is going to be to try to write up some of what we talked about. So Saram, if you're able to send what we have from today, that'll be great.
Definitely.
And I think I'll see if I can bang that out tomorrow. At least as a first pass to kind of help us keep moving. And I got 1 or 2 days next week to finalize my grading, but I think I'm super excited. So I think we should just rock it out.
Perfect. So 13 sounds good, and I think I'm gonna send you all invites and sending the recording and any memo that I have.
Perfect. Thank you both so much. This is awesome. I'm really, really excited.
Great. Have a great day.
Cheers.
All right.